Hey, good Saturday afternoon, everyone. You are watching Humanity in the Headlines. I am your host, Atiba Buchanan. Joining me, as always, is Mr. David Seaton. Dave, I'm really excited to be here today.
As am I.
Really.
Let me just say, first off, before I say anything, what a blessing and a privilege it is to serve your agenda here on Humanity in the Headlines.
We don't have enough people at the table to make it effective. We got to get like 8 more people. Hilarious. I hope everybody gets that joke. If they don't, go ahead, tell them, Dave.
That was a joke. That was a joke about earlier this week. The cabinet, the full cabinet was assembled together with with Donald Trump.
Right.
I can't say it. With Donald Trump, and they went around the entire table and just lauded him copiously. It was just effusive praise. It was just a stroke fest for about 25 minutes.
Yes. Now say it in English. So yeah, nonetheless, we had fun with that earlier this week.
Very much so.
Sorry about the late start today. Traffic, hate to say it, but it's true. It gets the best of us. Got me today, but I'm here, and in one piece, I didn't crash. I didn't get a ticket, so I'm very, very thankful.
That's a good thing.
Yes, that is a good thing. So, folks, we have a lot to talk about today. What we typically used to do was like 2 30-minute segments of things that were hot during the week, but things have been so crazy the past few weeks. We've had to change things up, so we try and touch on more topics because we found that it was just getting too difficult to leave certain things out. So with that said, we've really got to get at it because we don't have a lot of time this hour. What are we covering today? We got the shootings in D.C. of the congressman and the staff. We've got acquittal. We've got Steve Harvey remarks. I'm just going to give you a little highlight or just a preview. Understand that's going to be a nice "we told you so" moment on that one.
Right. Both of us.
Right, we both did. As a matter of fact, on this very show, on this very network. But it's cool. Shout out to Jaw Jackin. We got and that's just we got Philando Castile, the acquittal. Matter of fact, it wasn't even a mistrial, an acquittal.
Right.
On that. I mean, and there's still more. And we ain't mentioned Trump yet.
Right. I am being investigated for firing the FBI director by the man who told me to fire the FBI director
that I was thinking about firing the whole time anyway.
Witch hunt.
Right.
That's his favorite new phrase.
Right. But don't forget, he said he was thinking about firing the FBI director anyway.
No, he said he was going to fire him anyway in his interview with Lester Holt.
Right.
I was going to fire him anyway. I mean, and keep in mind, it's no good time to fire somebody.
Right. Anyway, so let us gather ourselves. We just wanted to give you a preview of what we're going to cover today. Do not leave. Again, Facebook Live, Intellectual Radio, iHeartRadio. We're going to be right back. Give us YouTube. Like 60 seconds. YouTube. Just gather ourselves and get it together. And we're about to slay it. I'm going to let you know right now. So thanks for listening to Humanity in the Headlines. We'll be right back. All right, I don't even think that was 60 seconds.
It was not.
It was not. So we are back. Thank you for listening to and watching Humanity in the Headlines. I kind of know what you're going to say about this situation.
Okay.
I do.
Okay.
Because I agree with you.
Okay.
On what you're going to say.
I'm glad to hear it. I wasn't certain which direction you were going in.
Yeah. So let me just catch everyone up in case you've been living under a rock. Young man by the name of Philando Castile was in the car with his girlfriend and his daughter. He was 32. His daughter at the time of the shooting was 4. I'm not sure of the age of his girlfriend. We assume she's around his age, thereabouts. She was the driver of the car. He was the passenger. The police officer pulled them over because he indicated that Philando Castile matched the description of a robbery suspect because he had, and I quote, a wide set nose, end quote. That's why he was pulled over initially. They had not committed any traffic violation. There wasn't any problem, but he had a wide set nose like a robbery suspect. And that was, I guess, probable cause to pull them over. In the course of the officer approaching the car, he found out that Mr. Castile was carrying a weapon, which you can in Minnesota, concealed carry. He was very upfront about it. He had a license to do so. He knew all the laws pertaining to carrying, and he was very upfront with the officer. In that moment, the officer instructed him to get his identification. In the process of doing so, the officer, his movements for him reaching for a gun.
I wouldn't even use the word mistook, but go ahead.
And he shot him, which ultimately ended in his death. The girlfriend, he shot him in the car while he was seatbelted with his daughter in the back seat. His girlfriend pulls out her phone, begins to go Facebook Live. At the time, Mr. Castile was still alive, and he ended up dying later. That was about a year ago, a little less than a year ago. We've had the trial. The officer was tried for second-degree manslaughter. Second-degree manslaughter. And he was acquitted on that charge, as well as other charges related to endangering the child in the back seat.
Reckless conduct or reckless discharge of a firearm. Or something. I forgot the story.
So he skated on everything. So my initial thought, I wasn't surprised at the acquittal, especially as I learned more about the jury makeup. But at the end of the day, there's nothing else to talk about. There's nothing else to deliberate, and there's nothing else to debate. The system, fine. The system is doing what it was designed to do, and it is designed to do what it's doing, which is acquit officers of killing civilians, in particular Black ones, at every level. Whether it's about whether or not the officer is even charged, whether it's with a grand jury, whether it's in the sentencing, whether it's in the jury selection, even with the judges, at every single stage, it is designed to benefit and give the officer the benefit of the doubt, which ultimately results in either an acquittal or
no charges at all,
or a mistrial. We've had over 1,100 civilians killed by police in 2016. 1,100. 13 of those cases came to trial.
Right.
Which is less than around 1/10 of 1%.
It's less, right. It was less than 1%.
Right.
It's right around, it's 1.07%.
Right. So what we're looking at then, and 0 convictions in 2016.
Correct.
0. So that tells us everything that the statistics tell us, just about everything that we need to know. So my initial thought is, I could only look at my children. My daughter asked me this morning, do you worry about Amiri? My son is 16 and he's a large kid. He's like 6'2". He works out. He's an athlete. He very much, except in the face, looks like a grown man, especially from any distance at all. He is the gentlest soul you will ever meet, but that clearly doesn't mean anything. He's a bright kid. He's never been in trouble. But when she asked me that, I couldn't even gather myself to answer. And I didn't see that coming. I didn't realize how quickly that I would get emotional about that. But I do worry about my son, because it's bigger than worrying about whether or not he would just be killed in a situation like that, or whatever the odd situation may be. He runs out of gas or whatever, the thing that really, really hurts is that I know the chances of him receiving any justice is next to nothing. And that's what makes it so devastating. It's one thing for this woman to lose her child like that. She called him her firstborn and her only son. Me. And we're going to play some of that sound later so you can hear it. But to not get the justice on top of it, dear God.
My comment on it is just a follow up on that, and I won't go too deep into solutions at this stage of it.
Mm-hmm.
That's a really heart wrenching, profound way that you just laid it out and just made it personal. I mean, anybody out there who is a parent or who has a brother or a father or a nephew or everybody out there has everybody out there who's African American has an African American male who's in their orbit, who's either a relative or a family member, and that's a real thing that all of us have to deal with, whether you know it or not. I mean, it's very easy to say, oh, this person was doing something wrong, or oh, this person was a criminal, or whatever rationalization you come up with, but in the case of Philando Castile, he did everything right.
Right. With the officer.
And he still got murdered.
And he wasn't doing anything wrong at the time of the intervention. There was nothing going, so it's not like he caught him in the middle of jaywalking. It's not that, for whatever reason you would pull someone over. None of that had happened. He pulled him over because he had a wide set nose.
And let me just follow up with this, because those of you who may or may not be up to date or keeping up on this story. Last night, 2,000 people marched overnight because of the acquittal of the police officer who shot. His name is Yanez.
Officer Yanez.
Geronimo Yanez. I'm sorry, Geronimo.
So I don't know if is he Native American?
He's Latino.
Okay.
So it's Geronimo Yanez. And 2,000 people march, and 18 people got arrested.
Right.
So just think about that for a second, that a police officer murders an African American citizen. The police officer is acquitted. Within 24 hours of the acquittal, 2,000 citizens exercised their First Amendment right to peaceably assemble. They were marching in a freeway, and the police arrest 18 of those people. I mean, the system is basically telling us we can kill you with impunity.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing you can do about it. And if you complain too loudly, we're going to arrest you again for protesting the heavy-handed nature of the government who is supposed to serve and protect. I'm just going to leave that out there for a second before I go too far.
Yeah, no, absolutely, man. I certainly appreciate and share your frustration and your point of view. The audacity of how this system is working is absolutely mind-blowing. Again, this isn't up for debate anymore.
Well, again, the people on the right would argue, and I've read this in several stories. And again, those of you who are watching us on Facebook Live, please post your comments, questions. We really want to get your feedback, because this is an important issue. But those on the right, I believe one of the representatives of the prosecutor's office, they stated in an article that I read, they said, hey, jury found them not guilty. They went through the system.
Right.
The jury said that, the jury acquitted him. What do you want from us? They went through the system. And I think it's really important, especially for us as African Americans, to remember historically the murderer of Emmett Till.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody knew that he was guilty. He bragged about killing Emmett Till. And he was tried 2 or 3 times in the state of Mississippi by an all-white male jury and was found not guilty all 3 times with a nod and a wink. So I think we need to even question. We need to question some of the foundations upon which our system is based, because bias and racism and partiality can get into the jury system, and we still can't get justice. The Constitution says you're supposed to be judged by a jury of your peers.
That's exactly where I was going to go.
And a jury of your peers, the reason why it says a jury of your peers is because if you are judged by a jury of your peers, the underlying assumption is that you will have something in common with these individuals who are tasked with your guilt or innocence, that they will be able to look at it. They will be able to look at it fairly,
objectively,
right?
But without bias,
right? But if you have a majority white jury in Minnesota. And again, this wasn't a white police officer that killed Philando Castile. This was a Latino. But at the end of the day, there is a huge difference between how white Americans and non-white Americans view the police.
And view African Americans, because
Right.
at the basis of what all of these officers say is fear. I was afraid for my life.
That's what he said.
And the average white person on the jury can identify with that. I would have been scared too, is what they're thinking, whether they say it out loud or not. So you're right. I think we're to a point now, because who got a jury of their peers was the officer, not the victim. So, and not that the victim should have had it, but not, what I'm saying is the officer, I guess he did get a jury of his peers, which is why it worked like that. But my point, the bigger question I think you're bringing is, or at least I thought about this myself. Does that mean then that black people need to be jurors for other black people when they do it? If a white person commits a crime,
well,
do the jurors need to be all white?
Well, that's an interesting point that you bring up, because I've been called for jury duty. I probably shouldn't say this, but I've gotten several jury notices in my 20s that I blew off.
Right.
Never went to jury duty. And we could get into the voir dire process and how when you show up to be on jury duty that African Americans have a higher percentage of being dismissed when it's an African American who's on trial, depending upon the crime, blah, blah, blah. But again, we need to have more African Americans showing up for jury duty, but then that addresses the underlying socioeconomics of it, that a lot of I think if we dug into it, there are some African Americans who are not showing up to jury duty because they don't have the kind of jobs where they can do that.
Right.
They can't afford to show up to jury duty and get paid $17 a day plus parking.
Yeah.
Plus a lunch.
And don't forget, then you got a percentage of people that can't do it because they have a background. They smoked marijuana, now they have a felony.
Right.
And they can't own a gun, or they can't be a part of a jury, or the host of other things that cause them to then be second-class citizens for the rest of their lives.
Right.
So
we did get a comment, and I just want to say this really quickly. We want to make sure this story is not just an African American male story. It happens to African American women as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, of those 1,100 people that were shot in 2016, I'd certainly welcome a breakdown of that. But we know, we can look at Sandra Bland and know that not only was she killed, but there was absolutely no justice. She got a street named after her, though.
Right.
Chasm for those that can't see my face.
Right. Right. And ask ourselves as an African American community, and I've said this before. And I'll wait before we go to solutions. But we really need to ask ourselves as African Americans, if we can't get justice on the street, meaning that we get pulled over more often, for the same crimes. If you listen to police officers, they'll say, well, more African Americans are riding around with with marijuana. But we know that the use of marijuana between African Americans and white people is the same.
Yep.
So, but my point is, if we can't get justice when we enter into the system, meaning you get pulled over or whatever, you can't get justice in the courtroom because racial bias and because of jury pools and so forth and so on. And then you can't get justice when it comes to sentencing. If you're an African American, you're more likely to get more time, a harsher sentence, a harsher punishment. We saw during the Obama years that they were trying to roll back the disparity in sentencing laws between crack cocaine and powder cocaine. Now we see Attorney General Jeff Sessions is trying to roll that back. If we cannot expect to get justice through any part at any stage of the system, what's the remedy that we see? Like I said, even when we go and protest the day after, we get arrested.
Let's do this, because I want to get into that, but I do want to speak to the mom, Valerie Castile, and just play a little bit of some of her comments yesterday to the media right after the verdict came down. Go ahead, sir.
My son would never jeopardize anyone else's life by trying to pull a gun on an officer, and the gun was not fire ready. These are some of the facts that came out in the trial, and I am so very, 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 very disappointed in the system here in the state of Minnesota, because nowhere in the world do you die from being honest and telling the truth. Now, these are some things that you need to know and recognize. There has always been a systemic problem in the state of Minnesota, and me thinking with my that we would get justice in this case, but nevertheless, it never seems to fail us. The system continues to fail Black people, and they will continue to fail you all. Like I said, because this happened with Orlando, when they get done with us, they're coming from you, for you, and all your interracial children. Y'all are next.
So straight from the mouth of the mom of Valerie Castile, of Philando Castile, her name is Valerie, and our hearts go out to her. I can only imagine the pain and the frustration and the anger that she must be going through.
Let me just say, I'm glad to hear an African American parent be angry.
Right. I was just about to say, it was so refreshing.
So sick and tired of Dylan Roof goes into a church in Charleston, South Carolina, shoots up the church, kills 9 people, and
we're not going to name call them.
And the survivors show up to his court case and say, and the first thing they say is, "I forgive you." We had another post that talked about this being post-traumatic stress syndrome. Is it PTSD going through the Black community that we've been so conditioned that we can't even be angry anymore in the moment when we are murdered?
Right.
We can't even get angry when we get murdered. We got to get up there and say, "I forgive you." Dude. I have a 16-year-old daughter. And I'm glad we have the comment that there are females that get killed just as much as men. But if my daughter gets killed by a police officer under dubious and suspicious circumstances, I'm making a call for arms across this country. I'm not just spouting off no forgiveness.
I agree with you 100%.
I'm not that dude.
And it was, like you said, it was refreshing to see that anger. And that's another reason I wanted to play the clip, but not just to honor, but to play the clip and understand this is what all these moms feel. Type of disrespect and frustration. And my heart goes out to this woman. But Black people have feelings too. We have emotions too. We love our children too. Later in the clip, again, that's what she describes Philando as her first and her only male child. Her first child. Everybody knows how you feel about your firstborn. I can't imagine going through. I can't imagine the effect on his 4-year-old child in the back seat, watching her father be summarily executed. That officer, by the way, fired 7 times into a car with a 4-year-old in it. And Philando,
a stopped car
that Philando wasn't even the driver of, and he hit him 5 times. 5 times.
We also had another comment, and I just want to put this out there as a part to the conversation. We had one of our posters say, and I hear this all the time, all cops aren't bad.
Okay, and?
Well, I would take.
I'm sorry, did somebody just say that now?
Somebody just posted that a minute ago. They were posting it in context of a larger. He was saying that the whole verdict was bogus, but they were saying, yeah, we got to be, don't paint all cops with a broad brush, blah blah blah.
Okay.
And we oftentimes hear that, but let me just say for the record, and I've said it before, for everybody out there who has a job, if there is a racist person at your job, if there is a person at your job who's a malcontent or a troublemaker or whatever, everybody at your job knows who that person is. You don't go to work every day with someone and they are racist or they're bad at their job, or you don't go to work every day with somebody who's really nice or with somebody that you like and not know it. So when I hear people say all cops aren't bad, my response is, for every cop out there who does commit this type of heinous act, everybody else on the force knows that this person is either racist or something isn't right with them, and they don't say anything. So my position is to say to all of our listeners and to say to America, we have got to reform. It's not just the guy who goes out there and pulls the trigger. It's the supervisor who looks the other way when he takes it too far. It's the supervisor or it's the other cop who signs off on a phony report when they were out there and they saw what happened, and they sign off when they know that their fellow police officer is lying on a report. All of that creates the climate where people can now, when these police officers go out here, and like I said, they are acting as judge, jury, and executioner. And why not? Because the worst thing that's going to happen is they're going to be put on administrative leave with pay, go through the system, maybe lose their job where they are, but then they just relocate to another police department and the cycle starts all over again.
Understand, Officer Yanez is no longer an officer. However, he's getting a severance package that will allow him to more easily transition into whatever he's going to get into next.
But he's not losing his bond, and this is something that I recently read about. He's not losing his bond, so he can still be a police officer.
And he may be. My point is, he's still going to get money to help if he decides to be whatever. There's going to be a lump sum of money given to him to leave the force.
Right. And guess who's paying? And guess who's, again, wrap your mind around this, people. Guess who's paying that money? Taxpayers. We are paying police officers to murder us. And then when they get fired or moved, we're paying them again. I mean, that is crazy. That is crazy. At the very, very least, we need to reform the system that when a police officer commits an act of malfeasance to this degree, that money needs to start coming out of these police unions.
Right.
We should not be taking the money out of taxpayers' pockets.
And that step in and of itself would prevent a lot of what happens from
because
happening.
Because police would police each other.
Exactly.
Hey, dude, you're messing with my pension.
Exactly.
You're messing with my livelihood.
Exactly. If I could just piggyback on the point earlier, we know all cops aren't bad. We know every district attorney isn't bad. We know every judge isn't bad. We know that every juror isn't bad. What we're talking about is a systematic problem that cannot check itself and does not have checks and balances in place that allow people to get justice. It is a systematic problem. So we do not need the reminder that all cops are not bad. We understand that, and that isn't the problem. However, police do not get the right to say that all cops aren't bad, but also get to vigorously defend every single bad one. If they're bad cops out there, then do the things that are appropriate when they do something bad. Convict them. At the bare minimum, at least be honest on the police report and don't back them up.
I have to part ways on that one. If you consider yourself if you look in the mirror and you are a police officer and you tell yourself, I haven't murdered anybody, I'm not a bad cop, but then you watch one of the cops who works with you murder someone and you don't say anything,
and
or you sign a phony police report, you are a bad cop. And when you talk about those people and the police officers who are committing these crimes, I would go so far as to say you are talking about a vast majority of the police force. It is a problem with the culture. A lot of times we try to talk about, this is black and white, and why do black people get mad when a white cop shoots a black citizen? This guy was a Latino. Right. So we're not talking about black and white. We're talking about a power structure that is insulated from being held accountable when it airs. So I will go so far as to say that by virtue of the fact that you have this huge lack of accountability in the system of the police as it exists, yes, all cops are bad. Because I don't remember the last time that a cop came out and got on television and got behind the microphone and said, yeah, he killed him, he's been a racist, I didn't say anything for a long time, but I'm going to say something today. When cops start doing that, then I'll sign on to the all cops aren't bad.
Look, the other thing about that point too is, you know who else isn't all bad? All black people aren't bad. All Hispanics aren't bad. All Arabs or Muslims aren't bad. But nobody else gets that benefit of the doubt. We all have to operate under the assumption that we are all bad until we show otherwise. But with cops, oh, they're not all bad, and we're supposed to take that at face value.
Listen, you want to say my solution?
Please go ahead, because we got to wrap it up. We're done with this.
Okay. All right.
Go ahead, bro.
It's going to take some hard work, and we used to do it, but it's going to take some hard work. Every African American who is under the sound of my voice, who can legally both purchase a firearm and get a concealed carry permit. All African Americans, especially our men, all African Americans need to go out and purchase a firearm, and we need to start policing our own communities. We need to start policing the police. The only way this is going to change. We have prayed long enough. We have marched long enough. We have boycotted long enough. We have petitioned the government long enough. We have sang and shouted long enough. The only thing that police respect is force. And we have to make up in our mind as a community, we have to make up in our mind as African Americans, are we going to continue to allow ourselves to be murdered? If they're going to kill us anyway,
Right.
If they're going to kill us anyway, if I'm going to die anyway, I would rather die defending myself and my family and my neighborhood than to be sitting passively and timidly in the passenger seat of my car while my girlfriend is driving and my 4-year-old kid is in the back seat and get murdered because a nervous cop shoots me after I tell him, hey, I've got a legal firearm and a permit to carry it. Oh, show me your license. And then I reach for my license and I get murdered. No, we can no longer allow this. We are not going to get the justice that we seek going through the system. We have to go another way. And it's insanity to keep trying the same thing and expecting different results.
No justice.
We need to start buying some guns.
No justice, no peace. You can't expect peace when there is no justice. Take that how you want. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk about more guns, shooting in D.C., because we definitely got a lot of thoughts about that. You're watching Humanity in the Headlines. We'll be right back. We are back on Humanity in the Headlines. Mr. Tiba Buchanan, thank you for listening and watching. With me, of course, is Mr. David Seaton. Time is against us, my friend. So we got a lot to talk about. We don't have a lot of time, but so let's get to it. We had a shooting earlier this week in Virginia, in D.C. Politicians, I guess, play an annual baseball game, which surprised me because I thought it would have been softball. Like they're doing like overhand baseball, as hard as they can throw it. That's kind of amazing to me because it's not easy to pitch.
Well, granted, most of the people who in Congress are old white men. So,
well, I'm saying it's not. I'm not talking about the challenge of hitting the ball. I'm talking about the challenge of throwing it. Like that's not easy to do.
I wouldn't be afraid of John McCain's fastball.
Right, exactly. Like I'd imagine there's a lot of balls, like ball 78. Right? Anyway, so they were practicing in the early morning hours. The the Republicans. Well, the Democrats practicing at a different field.
Right. It wasn't their day to practice.
Wasn't their day to practice. So this gentleman from Illinois,
Belleville, Illinois,
comes out. I guess he had moved to the area recently, but he's had a stroke of bad luck or bad circumstances, things that have happened to him. He's lost his job. I think he was estranged from his wife. Living in a YMCA, he was a business owner. He's had a few things, not go his way. The media definitely let us know that he was a Bernie supporter, and definitely very anti-Trump. But he had a AR-15 and a handgun,
right?
And he ended up shooting. What was the congressman's name again? Scalise.
Right. He's the majority whip
out of Louisiana, if I'm not mistaken. He shot him in the hip. He's alive. He's going through several surgeries. He definitely has a long road ahead of him, but it looks like he's going to eventually be okay. And that's certainly what we desire. Several other people were shot, a couple of police officers that were there, a staffer, but they all had, serious injuries, but they're all okay. So no one was killed except the shooter himself.
Right.
So I think this mic. Okay. So at any rate, I think this situation forces a lot of conversations. And this is what immediately came to mind. I had to write it out so I wouldn't forget. A conversation about gun control, media narratives, healthcare, the definition of what is considered violence, and even the AHCA, excuse me.
That's a lot.
So that's a lot, but it forces all of these conversations. The first thing and Second Amendment, excuse me. So the first thing I want to talk about is the Second Amendment. We have some sound for that, right? So let's play that. This is a Judge. I always mess his name up. Let me see if I say it right. Napolitano.
Yeah. He's from Fox News.
Say about the Second Amendment.
The Constitution specifically and directly insulates the right to keep and bear arms from interference by the government. It could not be more clear. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. So since the Congress can't change the Constitution, how could they possibly take away your right to keep and bear arms? Here's the dirty little secret about the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment was not written in order to protect your right to shoot deer. It was written to protect your right to shoot tyrants if they take over the government. How about you on that one?
Judge Napolitano.
I'm so glad he said that. That was so eloquently put.
They always conveniently forget to read the last part of the Second Amendment that says a well-regulated militia.
Yes, but we'll get to that. So he's specifically saying that the Second Amendment is for potentially shooting a tyrannical government. So this gentleman, as was reported, the other congressman, he clarified, hey, who's on the field right now? Democrats or Republicans? He said Republicans. And the guy, that's who he shot after.
I'll be right back.
Right. That's what he said. and we're not making light of the situation. The whole point of me bringing that up is you cannot say that violence is never the answer out of one side of your mouth, and out of the other side of your mouth endorse the potential shooting of government figures if you feel by your definition they've become tyrannical. Because in essence, that's what this guy did. Wow, like they say, I can't speak to these insane shootings. He wasn't insane. He may have been troubled, he may have been disturbed, but he wasn't insane. He knew what he was doing. He clarified who he was shooting at. He was shooting at the government, and a government that by his definition had become tyrannical. So he did the very thing that you say the Second Amendment is in place for. So which one is it? Is violence never the answer, or can we shoot government officials when we feel like we can?
I'll take it even a step further. The irony of this story is just almost thick enough to choke on. 90% of Americans want some sort of stronger gun regulation. either in universal background checks,
right?
Universal background checks, or outlawing certain, assault rifles, fully automatic assault rifles. 90% of Americans want that. So if 90% of Americans want tighter gun control, and the Congress, being controlled by Republicans, refuses to accede to the wishes of the 90%, and then someone takes a gun and shoots at the very people who, if they possibly had implemented the will of the people, could have avoided being shot, I feel no sympathy. Again, I might get a lot of hate mail today, but I feel no. When I was absolutely disgusted to watch those congressmen talk on the day the shooting happened, and they're just waxing on about, oh, we were out there and one of the congressman's sons was out there and I was worried that he might have gotten shot, and all the congressmen are this little boy's dad, and we were out there first thing in the morning practicing to raise money for charity, and someone came out here and shot us. Oh my goodness, how could this have happened? What happened to these congressmen is the reality of a lot of Americans every single day. In Chicago, the police has created safe routes for kids who walk to school so they don't get shot by gangs. So I'm supposed to feel sorry for some congressmen who were, again, they were up at 8 o'clock in the morning on a Wednesday practicing baseball. That in of itself is something most Americans will never be able to do. Most Americans at 8 o'clock in the morning are either at work, on their way to work, or going to sleep because they just got off work.
So you gave me a perfect segue. There was an article that I came across. Here's the headline of the article. Sorry, I don't feel an ounce of sympathy for Steve Scalise. Now, this piece was written by Mr. Manny Schweitz, and he said some pretty profound things in the article. If I could just get to it, there we go. He says this. He says, I have no sympathy for Steve Scalise. This is a man who voted against healthcare funding for 9/11 first responders, takes donations from the NRA, and is part of the GOP plan to gut Obamacare. The man who shot him had no business owning a gun of any kind, much less the assault rifle he was armed with that day. Yet Scalise has opposed any sort of gun regulations because he cares more about the wishes of the NRA and the fanatics he represents instead of the thousands of Americans who are killed every year by gun violence. So does that wrap up? That's pretty much it.
And for those of you who might be listening, who might be saying, oh, David, you might be going a little bit too far. This is a congressman. Come on, where's your respect? This is a congressman. Look, that's part of the problem. Part of the problem is that congressmen, people in Congress, people in Washington, D.C. are not accountable to the people, and that we, the people, sometimes elevate to a point where if that congressman should have been safe at that baseball game, should have been safe in that gazebo when he was playing in Ohio and got shot. And Philando Castile should have been safe when he was riding. I mean, again, we are all Americans. And if all Americans are not going to be treated the same, I don't care if you're a congressman.
Exactly.
I don't care if you're they were literally having conversations about whether or not they should appropriate funds to get more security for Congress people when they go out to events like this. You and I as Americans, we don't get the opportunity to say, well, you know what, I guess I need to hire some more security because I live in a bad neighborhood. Right. Or I need to hire some more security. I'm going to visit my family or going through a bad part of town. No. We can no longer we need to stop this elevating politicians like they are the aristocracy of the United States. They are public servants. And again, that's part of the problem. The media just waxed on all day covering these politicians, and it's sick.
Yeah, I saw several of them recount the story of what happened, what they saw, the events of that day. And one congressman in particular, and I forget his name, but he broke down during the retelling of it.
Right.
And I just thought that was just amazing. I'm like, you probably own 15 guns. And finally, when you're in a dangerous situation, now you can't even bring yourself to have the strength to recount the story on camera. I again, as Tim Wise would say, I thought that was just precious. I really did, because again, welcome to our world, Congressman.
Right.
Welcome to our world. Again, specifically on Steve Scalise. Understand too, this is a gentleman that that is self-described as David Duke without the baggage.
Right. Right.
So again, he even represents the district which elected David Duke to the Louisiana legislature, and he also Steve Scalise addressed a neo-Nazi convention in 2002. So again, for these people who again just purport that the Second Amendment is life, is everything, and they could always imagine a scenario where if under the Obama administration they were going to come for your guns, that they would, the only way they want to get that gun was out of their cold, dead hand. In that scenario, it's easy for them to imagine shooting government officials. And it's someone who is liberal-minded doing it. Now it's a problem. Now it's a problem with all the rhetoric that we've been having. Now we've got to be civil. Now they had a great game and a big kumbaya moment. Keep your game and pass some legislation that helps people in their everyday situations.
And we would be remiss if we did not also mention that another big part of the problem is the socioeconomic divide. The average salary of someone working in Congress is about $175,000 a year.
That is correct.
I think 180 or low 200s if you're the Speaker of the House, or if you're the like Mitch McConnell and Paul Ryan and Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer. But my point is that if you make $170,000 to $200,000 a year, and the average salary in the United States, I think the average salary, of all 50 states, is like around $48,000 for a household. If the life that you have, or the lifestyle that you have as someone who makes $200,000 a year, is vastly different from someone who makes 48.
And that isn't their only revenue stream.
And that's not their only revenue stream. But my point is that they live in a bubble. They cannot relate to the experiences that ordinary Americans experience every day, which is why the one senator was choked up to tears. He could barely bring himself to talk about it, because if he was experiencing this more often, if he was interacting with people that this happened to all the time, he would be desensitized to it enough that he would have at least been able to retell that story. But that experience is so far removed from his reality because of his income and because of his access as being a representative. That's why he couldn't tell the story. And that's another problem, that the separation between the average American and the people who are writing our laws is a chasm. That's why we can't get laws passed that would benefit ordinary Americans.
I think that's a great point. We're going to have to leave that conversation there. We still didn't get even a chance to talk about again the other things. What really is violence. I think we can expand that to Michigan. That's violence. You could talk about the fact that this congressman has the best health care in the world, and he's receiving the best care because of his position. And it's because people like the gentleman that shot him losing the things that they've had that causes them to snap like that. I'm not justifying what he did or supporting what he did. What I'm saying is, if we're not going to be honest enough to understand why he did what he did, then we're going to have it happen again. He's not the first, and he will not be the last. So again, we're going to leave that there. But that does allow us to transition right into, since we bring up Flint, because we got about 5 minutes left and we have to get this in. So a few months ago, David and I were guests on a show called Jawjacking. It's a great show. It comes on Sundays at 5 o'clock. It's a great show.
Right here on Intellectual
Radio. But we had a very spirited debate, and it was a really good debate. Both sides had great points. But this was back when President Trump was calling for Steve Harvey to come to the White House to discuss issues in the Black community. And many people, and this is not just the guests of that show, but many people, we had debates on Facebook about this, were saying that if the president calls someone from our community, our job is to equip that person with the information they need to go have that conversation. And David and I were saying, but he's a comedian. This isn't what he does. We actually have people that do this type of thing for a living that be well more equipped to go and have that conversation if you're genuine about having a conversation.
Right.
And again, we were, we debated that, not able to convince a lot of people of that perspective. So now the other day on Steve Harvey's morning show, he was debating, or I guess with a guy from Flint, about the NBA championship. Steve Harvey is from Cleveland, and Cleveland lost. And the guy, I guess, was maybe doing some taunting about Cleveland losing and Golden State winning. And Steve's only recourse in his mind from Flint was to say to him, hey, nice brown glass of water, making light in reference to the Flint water crisis that has caused people to get lead poisoning and
Legionnaire's disease.
And die from Legionnaire's
12
disease.
people.
So obviously the joke was in poor taste. It was not funny. It was not something that should have ever been uttered, especially from Steve Harvey. But here's the killer part. In Steve Harvey's defense of himself, his visceral response, the first thing out of his mouth was, hey, I'm a comedian. I was just blown away because, again, that's what we had been saying. He's not an ambassador. He's a comedian. So let's ask this now, 5 months later, of everybody listening that was supporting that. What happened from that meeting with Trump? What legislation is on the table now from the meeting with Steve Harvey and Donald Trump? What are we looking to get out of that meeting from the Black community? Are they about to pass something that you know of, Dave?
Is the worst. Let me just say that.
Has he officially bumped Ben Carson?
He has officially bumped Ben Carson.
Go ahead.
To say to someone from Flint, Michigan, have a nice tall glass of brown water. As a matter of fact, I read another article where he was commenting about the people of Flint, Michigan, and saying, why don't you just move? Why don't you just pack up and just move? Get out of there if you don't like the water. So again, we live in a time where we elevate people based on fame and money. That's why Donald Trump is sitting in 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, because he had fame and money. Steve Harvey has the seat, or has the position that he has, because of fame and money. And when fame and money removes you, when it removes you so far that you can make a joke about an entire group, an entire city of people, your people, African American comedian. I remember watching Steve Harvey 25, 26 years ago when Def Comedy Jam was still on, when I was an undergrad, when Martin Lawrence was the original host. And I used to, we used to watch Def Comedy Jam every Friday night. So I've watched Steve Harvey over the years. I've never been a huge fan of his, but I've appreciated how he has been able to capitalize,
build a niche for himself.
Right, and build a niche for himself. But then to exploit that, and even in a moment to joke about a city full of African Americans who are poor, who through no fault of their own are subjected to drinking poisoned water and pay for it, and then joke about that. And then again, for his response to be, I'm a comedian. And again, like you and I said, that's all you and I were saying 5 months ago.
Right.
Why is Donald Trump calling a comedian to the White House to have a conversation about policy? Which no fault of Steve Harvey's, because that's what you and I were saying. That was a fault on Trump that he called Steve Harvey. But Steve Harvey should have said, you know what? He should have had a moment of levity and introspection and said, I'm a comedian. Why don't you call Van Jones, or why don't you call Cornel West, or why don't you call?
And we as a community have to just take into account, no other community sends comedians and athletes. We had Steve Harvey and Ray Lewis. You will not find. I don't know of a Chinese comedian, and I certainly don't know of one that will go talk about issues in the Chinese community. You will not find that. You will not find that the Jews will not send Jerry Seinfeld to talk policy.
Correct.
Because there are people in place to do that. Only we could do that, and then think it's acceptable that Ray Lewis, no slight against him, and what's his name already? We talking about him?
Steve Harvey?
Yes, it's Steve Harvey.
Right.
So there's no way that we send them to talk about issues in the community, and we have so many viable alternatives. And again, the fact that we even that the people that call to do this think that we would find it okay, and the fact that we do find it okay, is something that we need to have a lot of introspection about as a community. So,
well, again, it speaks deeper that the pool of the Black intelligentsia is not embraced or known by the average African American.
right.
The average African American that we're talking, or the people who support Steve Harvey. I don't want to say the average African American, but I will say the people who are the biggest supporters of Steve Harvey probably don't know who Van Jones and Cornel West are, or Michael Eric Dyson.
Right.
They probably don't know those names.
Right. Mark Lamont Hill.
Right.
So again, those are the most popular ones that are just televised.
Right.
You know,
Right.
there's scores of people that are just as qualified to talk about those things that do not have
Right.
the fame and popularity.
Right. And again, I'm glad you said that. I brought up those individuals because, if Steve Harvey was just as funny but wasn't on Family Feud, and wasn't on
right.
and wasn't on what's that other show, and he didn't have a talk show, and he didn't have a nationally syndicated radio show, but was just as funny, Donald Trump wouldn't even know his name.
Right.
Donald Trump called him because he has those things. So I'm simply saying that the names that I dropped, those are individuals who are nationally known in the Black intelligentsia pool of African Americans. So if he was looking for somebody for name recognition, people he could have called who are also versed in the areas that Donald Trump said that he wanted to address and discuss.
That's all we have time for today, good people. There's so many things, again, we didn't even get a chance to get to.
Bill Cosby, mistrial.
Right.
But the DA has already said that they're going to try him a second time.
Already, before he even spoke to the jury pool. And then we do want to acknowledge that today, I think, is the 2-year anniversary of the Charlotte shooting.
Yes. Yes.
So you mentioned that earlier, and
Right.
today is actually the anniversary, so we want to acknowledge that as well. So
Right.
Thank you so much for joining us today.
Happy Father's Day to
Happy Father's Day, sir.
my lifelong friend.
Absolutely. Happy Father's Day to all you fathers
All
out
the listeners
there.
and watchers, happy Father's Day.
Everybody stay safe. Have a great weekend, and we will see you next week. Thank you for listening, for watching Humanity in the Headlines. Share the show on Facebook Live. Thanks so much. We'll see you next week.